Hello, fellow readers. My name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky. This video is my January wrap-up. Month of January, I read 9 books, pretty good for me. 8 of those were fiction, 1 nonfiction, and according to Storygraph, my most common moods were challenging, reflective, and dark. One of the projects I set for myself this year was to read a short story every day. In January, I'm off to a good start. I did read a short story every day. I read 31 short stories. I read mostly from collections by single authors. So I started with Mark Twain, The Man That Corrupted Hadleyburg, and other stories. I love the title story, The Man That Corrupted Hadleyburg. There are some other really good stories. Of course, The Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, which has been anthologized over and over again. The story about the joke that won Edward a fortune. I may not be exactly right, but it's close to that. There were a few that I thought were a little more clunky in this collection. The Diaries of Adam and Eve, less interesting to me. But all in all, everything very well written, and even the ones that had plots that made me shrug a bit, still very well told. I'm glad I read this. If you haven't read The Man That Corrupted Hadleyburg, that is easy to find all over the place, and that is a story you definitely should read. I also read a short story by Owen Wister. I found just a single short story. It wasn't a full collection. It was just this short story. It's called Mother, which I thought was quite enjoyable, about a man who's investing money, and his financial advisor is always saying, well, this is what I bought for Mother. And it turns into a fun little tale of wealth and opportunity and loss, mostly financial loss. Good stuff. I'm glad I read that too. I read a series of early short stories by Willa Cather. This was a collection I found that I listened to on audio. The picture I've put up here is of a similar collection. It has a lot of the same stories, but this isn't the exact collection I read. What I read was just called The Early Short Stories of Willa Cather. These are short stories that Willa Cather wrote as she was involved with a number of women's magazines, and I still found them quite fascinating. I may not be the perfect audience for these, but really well done. I especially liked A Resurrection, and I have a copy here from the magazine Home Monthly that it came out of with an illustration. I'll put that up here for you. Willa Cather is a fine author and worth reading her stories, even if you may not think they apply directly to you. I'd say go read them anyway, especially A Resurrection, which is available for free on the internet at the Willa Cather Library. I think that's at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And finally, a set of short stories by Louis L'Amour. All of these were fantastic. West of the Tularosa is the name. There were so many good stories in this collection. I think there are 8 altogether. The one about the lion hunter is quite good. West of the Tularosa is good itself. Just all enjoyable. Just a good, solid set of stories. That's a collection that's worth grabbing and reading. you'll find it worthwhile. I certainly did. The other project I set for myself this year is to read all of the Walt Longmire series by Craig Johnson. I don't know if I've read any complete books, and I am a bit spoiled by having watched the television series. And I know I've read parts of these, and I know I've read some short stories by Craig Johnson, and I liked it. I just read The Cold Dish. That's the first one. It's the first one I've read in the series. There are a whole lot more to go, and I'll be working through that series throughout the year and into next year if I need to. I just want to get them all read. The Cold Dish, one nice thing about The Cold Dish is that it was written before the TV series, and so you get Craig Johnson's way of picturing all of the characters. It's hard, once you've seen the TV show, it's hard not to think of the actors who played Walt Longmire and Henry Standing Bear and Ruby and Ferg, the whole bit. And I think they did a pretty nice job of casting that, but I'm really trying to let Craig Johnson speak more directly to me through the words. Cold Dish is a great book. I did not expect the final twist. So well written, very funny, with a very dry sense of humor, and the characters, Walt Longmire especially, but also Henry Standing Bear and Vic, whatever her Italian last name is, the deputy, Ruby, the former Sheriff Lucian. Just great characters, and I think most of them stick around through the bulk of the series. We'll find out. Besides the Walt Longmire book by Craig Johnson, I read two other novels. One is the classic The Virginian by Owen Wister, published in, 1902. A fantastic book filled with a lot of the Western tropes that would be accumulated and borrowed and copied and mimicked and subverted by so many Western writers over the years, and Western television shows and Western film and movies. But the book itself, thought of as the first Western, usually called the first Western, Owen Wister's The Virginian, is just a fantastic book. I think everybody should read it. I think everybody should probably read it more than once. It's just a great book. The other book I read is a more recent, it is a Western. It was written in the last couple of years by Donald Willerton. It's called Death in the Tall Grass. And it is set in the, I think right around the turn of the century, right at the late 1800s, early 1900s, I think early 1900s mostly, about a fairly young man who's in law school who finds out that his mother's brother, who she had always said died of cholera, looks like he didn't really die of cholera. Something else happened. And so he goes off from St. Louis, where he has been raised and where he's going to school, where his mother and father and the rest of his family live, goes from there off into New Mexico, around the Las Vegas area of New Mexico, to see if he can figure out what happened to his uncle. Really fascinating. Some woo-woo stuff here and there with Native American shaman, medicine men magic, but I thought it was fine. Craig Johnson's book had some of that, actually quite a bit of that as well, and yet it's not so far away from believable. And it's very easy to see how these characters respond to the magical things that happen. And I liked it. That was quite a good book. I'd never read a Don Fullerton book before. He's written quite a few, and I'm sure I'll seek out more as time goes by. I did read one graphic novel. It's a rendering of Cormac McCarthy's book, The Road, illustrated by Manu Larsenet. Let's see if I can, it's kind of shiny, but that's pretty nice. Let's see if I can get some good pictures here of what the interior looks like before I have to return this to the library. But you can see some of the way the art works. Very, very dark, fairly monochromatic, some in more sepias than grays. But I think just really it gives that sense. If you've read The Road, then you understand kind of the sense of how bleak that is. And I think that these illustrations by Manu Larsenet work really well. I'm really glad I read this. Of course, very little dialogue, but just so easy to get engrossed in the illustrations. The pictures are just so well done. I'm really glad I found a copy of this, and I will watch for more from Manu Larsenet. Of course, Cormac McCarthy, a fantastic writer in the first place, and Larsenet. The book came out after. It's a new book. It came out after Cormac McCarthy passed away. But Manu Larsenet had gotten permission from Cormac McCarthy to do this series. And Larsenet says he worked really hard to stay away from anything that was in the film. He really tried to put his own vision around McCarthy's words. And I think he did a fantastic job. This is worth looking at. And finally, the one nonfiction book I read, a history called Continental Reckoning, written by Elliot West. This was a look at the American West from about the 1830s through the 1880s. So really framed around the American Civil War and how the Civil War had an impact on the American West in so many ways. Tying in how slavery and the ideas of free labor played a role in the American West. Also how immigration, both people from Mexico who were already living in what is now the U.S., but it was in the War of 1848, the Mexican-American War. That part of what was then Northern Mexico was captured by the United States and annexed into the U.S. So you have these Mexican families who've been on this land for a long time, who are now part of the United States. You of course have the native people who have been on this landmass for a long time as well. And then you get immigrants from, particularly from China, but also some of the Irish and other immigrants from Europe. Talking about how that all mixed together, how the gold rush, the multiple gold rushes, first in California and then in Colorado and beyond, how that impacted what was going on in the West, how the railroads impacted, and how it all ties back to, and I really like the way he always says, instead of the North and the South in the American Civil War, he calls them the Northeast and the Southeast, which I definitely appreciate. But it's a really great context for looking at American history. It delves into a lot of the social aspects. It certainly talks about the political and military history of this area, but it really focuses on the social aspects, the roles of women, especially of roles of women in various economic sectors, in various racial and ethnic sectors, really ties things together in an interesting way. It made me think about a lot of ideas, and some of the ideas we have about the American West, and how I think for a lot of people it's just about immigrants, on the Oregon Trail, and conflicts with the Native and Aboriginal people here, with the Europeans and immigrants, and it's a lot more complex than that. And how transportation affected it, how railroads and steam engines and boats in the Panama Canal, or at least the road across Panama, how all of that influenced change. Really fascinating. It's a long book. It's a thick book. There are lots of ideas. But if you're interested in the American West in a wider context than you might normally get, it's definitely worth reading. So there we are, the 9 books that I read in January, with a focus on my short story project, my short story a day project, the reading the Walt Longmire series, and then just some of the other things I've read along the way. I hope you found this interesting and enjoyable, and I appreciate you watching, particularly those of you who watched all the way to the end here. Thank you so much for your support, and until next time, again, I'm Greg. This is Ghost Readers in the Sky, and I urge you to keep on reading.